There are many issues here, issues in terms of the safety of these tools, whether GPs are using them effectively and with critical discernment, because these tools may be biased in some ways.
Hi, I'm Jo Crawford and welcome to Times Radio's Tech Report. Today I'm joined by Charlotte Blease, Associate Professor at the Uppsala University in Sweden. Thank you for joining me on the Tech Report today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So you've very recently published a study which has found that around 1 in 4 GPs are now using AI in their work. Could you tell me more about the ways in which they're using AI?
Yeah, so this study found that about 35% said they were using generative AI tools, including and predominantly ChatGPT. 71% said they were using, of those who used it, ChatGPT for administrative and documentation purposes. About 27% said they used these tools for differential diagnoses, in other words, suggesting diagnoses. And just under a quarter, 24%, said they used them for referrals and for treatment options, so suggestions for treatment options.
And your research found that although these GPs were using this AI, almost none of them had formal training or guidance from their employers on how to use this. And I mean, I can think of a few reasons why that's probably quite problematic. But what would you say are the potential concerns about GPs using AI in this way, especially if they don't have specific guidance or training for it?
Absolutely, it's a huge concern. So, as you say, 95% in our survey said that they had had no training on this. And actually, GPs, when they responded in an open comment box, they really do desire more concrete advice on this. There are many issues here, issues in terms of the safety of these tools, whether GPs are using them effectively and with critical discernment, because these tools may be biased in some ways. They may be beneficial, but we don't know much about, as I say, how effectively they're using the tools. And then perhaps one of the biggest risks is potentially the patient privacy. So if patients are inputting information that could, in some sense, breach the privacy or de-identify re-identify the patient, and that can happen quite easily. With, you don't necessarily need to put a patient's name and address in. There are various ways in which it unfortunately it's quite easy to triangulate data, that is to work out who somebody is in a given area, particularly if they have a rare disease. 1 in 10 of us have rare diseases. So there are real risks to privacy through the use of these tools.
And your study also mentions concerns about AI's tendency to hallucinate, algorithmic discrimination. I mean, could you explain how that could cause a problem, for example, with doctors using AI for potential diagnoses, treatments?
Yes, there is a risk here. In our study, we found that only about 21% said they were using medical grade AI. So for the most part, GPs were using tools that are simply not designed for the purpose of medicine and all of its tasks. I'd say 71% said they were using ChatGPT, which is very concerning because these tools are just not designed for medical practice. So there are issues with the potential for what are called hallucinations. In other words, making stuff up with these tools. They can sound compellingly correct, and they also have obsequious biases. In other words, they tend to be people pleasing when you use them. A lot of the time, these tools are designed to keep the user interacting with them. They do sound sort of compellingly confident and correct. So there are various ways in which doctors need to be alert to the limitations of these tools. And that's not to say that some of them may not be without value. I think that they potentially could be, but there needs to be considerably more guidance. We've got a sort of a black hole here when it comes to education and AI literacy in medicine. And unfortunately, if you like, the wake up call or the alert has been sounded for a number of years now, but we still don't see tangible training being offered in medical curricula to students, which is Very unfortunate indeed for patients.
Because ChatGPT was launched in November of 2020, so I presume research on this subject is limited in respect to the fact that a lot of tangents of AI are relatively new. But I mean, can you see any trends on how doctors have been using AI over time?
As you say, sort of ChatGPT was unleashed November 22. But having said that, I mean, for example, Eric Topol, who's an AI, he's an academic, he's a cardiologist in America who wrote a report called the Topol Review, which was giving advice to the NHS in 2019, saying you can't just invest in technology, you've got to invest in training your health professionals with the use of these tools. Um, and unfortunately that it just hasn't quite materialized. So we do have these higher order principles from the GMC and the British Medical Association about the risks associated with these tools, but we have very little in terms of a playbook, a concrete specific guidance about how to use these tools and the challenges. But what we've seen is there's definitely a real adoption increase with documentation and administration. That's a big one. And that's partly because admin tasks take up about 50% of a doctor's day. So they're really burnt out and stressed out. And in fact, in our survey, we found that doctors who used these tools reported that they did help with workload. About 7 in 10 said that they helped with workload. We've also seen a higher adoption among GPs who work in larger practices, which may also be a signal that doctors with higher patient populations are turning to these tools for some assistance. And I just don't expect in the future we're going to continue to do this research that we're going to see just increasing uptake. So as I said, it went up from 20% in 2024. So that was 1 year after ChatGPT was unleashed in a sense. And a couple of years later, we're seeing, say, a modest increase to 1 in 4 GPs. But 1 in 4 is a lot for commercial tools.
I'm sure there are GPs that find benefits of using AI, and we see across all different types of business sectors that companies are trying to adapt to using AI and benefiting off of AI. Do you think that AI is going to be playing more of a permanent role, a more widespread role in the work of doctors, for example, not just in the UK, but globally as well, in terms of the future?
Definitely. I mean, these tools are here to stay, and the technology is only going to get better and better. So again, this is the challenge for all workforces, including the domain of healthcare. It's a case of adopting carefully adopting these tools, ethically adopting them, and also being practical. Because we've got to be sort of realists. These tools are already being used. It's not sort of tomorrow's conversation. It's really today's or even yesterday's conversation. And this is where we need doctors need to have much more guidance. It's got to be embedded in their curriculum. And we also have to offer patients more guidance around these tools as well. We don't know that much about how patients use these tools, but it seems highly likely that people are using these as first opinion services, potentially second opinion services, and where people lack access to care, our health systems are creaking. It's no wonder it would be very surprising if people were not turning to these tools in their droves to seek health information. That could be good in some respects, but in other respects, it does not come without its own challenges and problems. People need to be wary of that.
Yeah, because that's what I was wondering. I mean, we're seeing an increasing number of people that are using AI and like chatbots to get medical advice rather than going to their GP, for example. Do you think that if there's a problem, I guess like an ethical problem there, that if people hear about GPs using AI, people will start and question, why shouldn't I just use AI instead of going to my GP?
Many people may think that and suppose that. The key question is whether doctors who are trained professionals are using these tools, whether they're using them effectively, and whether they use them in a very different way from how patients might use these tools. So there are questions about um, how discerning different groups of people, particularly trained professionals, are when they use these tools. I think it's important to add that in this conversation about the use of these tools, it's often said, this is similar to what happened with Google. Doctors really worried about patients who turned to Google. But the fact is, doctors do use Google as well. People use internet resources. So, again, this will not go away. And studies with Google, it's important to add, showed that while doctors worried about it and were very cynical that patients wouldn't know what they're doing, and people still joke about that. Sort of it leads to cyberchondria. Everything seems to point to point to cancer when you Google symptoms and so on. Actually, people tend to be much more discerning than doctors have supposed, so we have to be careful not to have an overly paternalistic conversation. Many patients can become expert on their conditions. And a lot of people just know how to use these tools with a modicum of cynicism, wary of what the outputs are. But having said that, we need uh, more guidance, and we need patient doctors also to be given greater training again about limitations and how to be open and transparent about the use of these tools. In some sense, there's a third agent in the visit. It's not dyadic care anymore, it's triadic. That is, there's this agent called AI, and we should be transparent about the fact that people are using it, and be more open within medical conversations about that.
Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for joining me on the Tech Report today.
You're very welcome. And if listeners want to read more about this, I have a book out called Doctor Bot: Why Doctors Can Fail Us and How AI Could Save Lives, with Yale University Press.